Hello, this is Kevin Rollins here with the On Again, Off Again podcast for the Free Liberal. Today we're here again with our good friend Michael Osterlink.
How's it going, Kev?
Hey, it's going all right. We figured out our technical difficulties with the Firefox plugin no longer working. And you just got back from the gym, and I just got out of the shower, so we're freshly arrived in the channel here, and
one of us smells good.
One of us, well, I don't know. It's hard. I spend enough time on myself here in the house that sometimes I'm not sure if I'm talking to myself or if there are actually other voices in my head. And I think I smell good, but is that just in my own head, right? I need outside verification of my own reality.
That can help.
Well, this sort of goes right into what I was thinking about. We might talk about today. This issue of citizenship, and we always talk about policy and the general problems of governance and how we talk about politics and how we talk about partisanship and what's at stake and what are the right values and how do we get to a quote unquote better society. I think at a fundamental level, I sent this email link I think to you the other day on Facebook that there's a empathy for others is an important value. I think, though, that goes back into an awareness of our own limitations of knowledge and our own sort of idiocy inside of our own selves, and that we can very easily have a lot of dumb ideas just working by ourselves, and it's only by talking to other people and finding out what they see as being reality, and how their view is somewhat different from ours, that we get a better view of our own vision and our own mistakes, as well as our an enhancement of what we actually are looking at on both the micro and macro levels.
When I work with clients, you kind of hit it on the head. I talk about multiple perspective taking, and although any one person might be really smart in one particular multiple different fields, there's still limitations of knowledge because we're not gods yet. And it's really important to be able to take multiple different perspectives. And I don't even just mean in a particular field, so you can understand the broader perspectives or bigger map. I don't even mean politically, just in our own relationships, personal relationships, marriages, friends, and families. And I think a huge key to that, and you already mentioned, is empathy. If you can't put yourself in someone else's shoe, you don't understand where they're coming from. Kind of the biography that drove them to their present conditions in their lives. And if you don't have that mental perspective and the kind of the heart perspective integrated together with other people, there's kind of a lack of intimacy, a lack of authenticity in the relationships. And we can just kind of degrade into what we've seen in the broader political space, where people are defriending each other on Facebook and family members are not talking to each other.
Guilty as charged.
All kinds of really strange phenomena occurring more recently, but I don't think it's just the recent past. I think we go through stages of this kind of stuff where we have a tendency to kind of be more communitarian oriented.
Every 4 years it hits a low point.
What's that?
Every 4 years it hits a low point.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. It causes that, but somehow people get more political and angry, and they become more irrational than usual.
Well, also, I think, too, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, I think we're also kind of on the edge of a transition from the industrial age to the post-industrial age, or the information age. And anytime you have a transition, it's painful for a lot of people. It's fear-inducing, unless you're kind of on the cutting edge and really enjoy that, that space of creativity and innovation and anarchy, basically. If you don't enjoy that kind of space, it can be really challenging to one's ego. And the egos of various institutions we are embedded in. So I can understand why it happens every 4 years, but I can understand why it might be even more problematic now as the transition continues to take place, if that makes sense.
Well, and I was talking about this with a friend earlier, that the whole scale of innovation is probably less than it was 100 years ago with the advent of motor vehicles and aeroplanes and radio and all this kind of stuff. But in terms of the structure of our knowledge, the internet is really a challenge to. It really presents the postmodern reality to us, in that there's so many choices of what to look at and what to know, and we have these issues. It's well known that Facebook has this problem of being a sort of an echo chamber where, and it's almost, impossible for them to design it so that what they send to you appeals to you, and also what they send to you challenges your view. And so it tends to reinforce whatever it is that you think about, whether it's a good idea or a dumb idea. You're going to get more of that back from Facebook, and Facebook particularly, although all the social networks do it to some degree. But so given the fact that we have this unlimited choice of different views, the pornography, the different alternative lifestyles, and not sitting here casting judgment one way or the other on any of this, but just saying that, analytically, it's going to be harder to figure out what is going to be good for you. And once you have selected it, how much of the world alternative to that are you going to see? And so I think for politics is a particular challenge, because at least on the individual level, like, if I eat some junky food, or if I meet the wrong person on Tinder, I'm going to have a personal reaction to that. And if it's not good, I'll say, well, let's do less of that in the future. But whereas with politics, we can have a dumb idea, and once you vote, and your responsibility is kind of gone there, and whether the politicians were telling the truth, or whether or not they can actually accomplish what you think they're going to go do, or whether any of it makes any sense, is sort of secondary to what you believe. And it doesn't really, what actually happens doesn't feed back onto your own, other than the fact maybe becoming more cynical about politicians, not telling the truth or delivering on, Trump's going to make America great again. And, will we know it when we get it?
So I'd actually go from the very political to the personal, and listen to what you just said, and suggest that, we have seemingly two competing forces in us psychologically, if not a multitude of many other forces. But we seem to tend as human beings to be conservative, and I don't mean politically, but in the sense of we have certain biases embedded into us based on our culture and our biography, and we limit our realm of understanding to that particular space in our own lives. And anything that kind of confirms our biases, we reject. Anything that challenges our identities, we reject. And this is politically, but this is in a multitude of spaces. I mean, as a clinician, when I work with people as a therapist or as a coach, I see this all the time. If anyone challenges your identity, whether you think your identity is good or bad, it's your identity. People become defensive, and then they lash out. And I don't even mean violently. I just mean, passive aggressively or emotionally they lash out, or something along those lines. So, I think we have this tendency, as I said, to kind of be conservative in that way. I think and it makes sense, because we need to conserve our energy, our brain energy, to protect ourselves. So that's a fundamental need we have, is to ensure our own survival until we can pass our genes on to the next generation, if we so choose to have babies and stuff. So for energy,
economizing our attention is a critical decision-making process, and to not be swarmed under by a bunch of nonsense or by things that don't actively help us survive. That's so. How do you see technology affecting that?
Well, and I think it fits in with what you just said. I think we can use technology to confirm our own identities. And you see that a lot on Facebook. You surround yourself in real life with people who agree with you. You surround yourself with in fake life or virtual reality space, or whatever the hell we call Facebook. And in the future, virtual reality space, I'm sure we'll surround ourselves with people who confirm our own biases. But as I said, there seems to be two competing forces at least. One is the conservation of energy, or the conservatism built into our nervous system to ensure our own survival and not make sure we don't waste energy. And then there's kind of, especially you see this in children, but you see this in some adults too, kind of search for novelty. People are always kind of moving outside their own comfort zone, looking for something new experiences, et cetera, et cetera. And that can include intellectually. They're intellectually curious. They want to be challenged. They want to see the world in new and fun ways. You mentioned before we got online reality tunnels. They're searching for a multitude of reality tunnels, ones that don't necessarily confirm their own biases, but they can kind of challenge their own biases. I think what would be helpful for us as human beings is to kind of integrate those two, recognize the validity and the necessity of being conservative biologically, energetically, and also how do you create cultures that support novelty seeking without denigrating and destroying the conservation of energy, if you want to put it that way. And, you and I've kind of talked about that. We've had historically where the conservatives fight for what was, traditions, and then the progressives fight against those traditions for something new, which I think is a useful and interesting battle and conflict that needs to happen. But there's, throwing out the baby with the bathwater is a mistake. There's a lot of benefits from the conservative, politically, traditionally, energetically, personally, and also, like I said, kind of the progressive, let's go into new spaces and stuff. Now, when I say progressive and conservative, it doesn't necessarily line up with politics, because I know many progressives who are conservative in the way I'm talking about, and many conservatives politically who are more progressive in what I'm talking about in terms of cutting edge and always seeking novelty and trying new things and having new experiences. So it doesn't fit one-to-one. But I think with the free liberal is a great example. I mean, we've kind of touched upon this over the years that we've been having these kind of conversations. The free liberal is about kind of these experiments in culture, but it's not like creating the new man. We're not Maoists and Marxists and Stalinists or Sovietists or whatever the hell we call it. These various groups that emerge to say we have the new vision for the new man, and anything before us is illegitimate. We need to jettison, in this case, mostly kill anyone who had older worldviews.
Maybe you and I are lucky because we came of age at a time when the historical record was recently populated with extreme negative examples of those ideologies not working, and so we're not suckered into not with a K, it's CCORED, into believing in this kind of social change. Obviously, there are plenty of people who still believe that if we just had the right, compassionate, El Capitan socialismo guy, we would get it right, and everything would work great for the environment and for everybody. And obviously, there's a lot of controversy right now about the Paris climate agreement. And again, it mostly breaks down on, what I can tell from a lot of the media out there, social media particularly, it breaks down upon your priors. If you were an environmentalist, it's the worst thing ever. If you were a skeptic or you believe climate science is fake, you're just going to say, oh, thank goodness. But neither of those positions, I think, is really informed by actual scientific perspective, and it doesn't give any room to the other side to make a case. It's like, well, I already knew it was true, and I'm not going to think about it anymore.
Well, I'd clarify a couple of things, speak to a couple of different things and clarify one thing. You said the other side. So in the transpartisan space, I would like to acknowledge that there's multiple different sides, not just two. Kind of the binary thing is old school, last century, we need to jettison that. It gets in the way of really useful conversations.
Well, I think that's where, again, knowing that that's true is itself a piece of intellectual furniture that enables us to have that more complex conversation. And again, not to see things as being adversarial even is another improvement. Although again, it does, in politics, of course, it does boil down to a my way or your way. And in our political system, people do line up into two camps. And so that makes it difficult, I think, for people like myself, at least. I'm like a liberal. I lean Republican, but I'm very socially liberal, and I'm not, very pro-war. So I have trouble being a Republican, and I particularly would have trouble lining up behind President Trump. But at the same time, I realize that I can't, be too upset with people who support him or even don't support him. Because again, there are in reality there are a multitude of different values, and the politics doesn't represent that. So whether you're for or against Donald Trump doesn't tell me who you are.
I completely agree. And something you mentioned a little earlier in terms of science, like where's the science in the whole conversation around climate? And we don't need to necessarily get into a climate conversation. I'm ill-informed. I only have opinions. So it wouldn't be useful on my end to engage with you on that one because I just don't know the science well enough. But you make the point about science, and I think one thing that lacks in our citizenship is scientific literacy. Broadly speaking, I don't just mean on climate science, but the ability to use the scientific method to understand the world we live in. Unfortunately, it seems to be only taught to a select group of people who are utilizing it for academic or business purposes, as opposed to recognizing that way of thinking about the world would be useful for all citizens. A kind of a rational scientific approach And not saying that's the end all to be all. There are multiple different ways of understanding the world we live in, but that is an important one that seems to lack in our education systems.
Well, I always think about Jan Helfeld's interviews with various public policy people and politicians, and he wants to engage them in a Socratic discourse. Now, I don't think Jan has always got the right answer. His reasoning is always perfect, and I've personally debated with the guy. But in the fact he has gone through that preparation and thought about what are the defenses, for what are the positive negatives, people they were willing to on one hand, and secondarily they were literate enough in the various areas they're discussing to hold up a conversation. It'd be great to if Bernie Sanders got a great explanation for his new social program, where are his defenses against Hayekian complaints, public choice complaints? And I don't mean to be on the left. I mean, it'd be certainly nice if people on the right had a real answer to, well, what do we do about gun violence? How do we reduce? Is there anything we can do public policy-wise to reduce gun violence in the United States? That's an important question. And just saying, well, we love gun rights and I support gun rights, but that's not a full answer to what can we do to actually reduce these terrible events.
Well, and that actually goes to a good point I think you started out with, is kind of where we are as citizens. What is necessary to be a good citizen? And I think the ability to take multiple perspectives, to take seriously, you don't necessarily have to agree with everything everyone else has to say, but most people are not 100% correct, and most people are 100% wrong. There's limited partial truths in most people's stances on things. And to speak to your point, I think it's well said that most people on any issue don't take seriously the other sides. They dismiss them as in characterological attacks, like, oh, you're a commie, or you're a fascist, or you're, whatever they use to dismiss him, shut down the mind. They don't have an intellectual dialogue or debate. And just on gun control or the gun issues. I mean, we need a bigger frame, because gun control has a whole bunch of emotional, meanings to it, intellectual and emotional meanings to it. But whatever we want to call it, the fact that you can't have an intellectual conversation, not you, but a lot of people cannot have a kind of intellectual conversation around gun safety, gun rights, how do you reduce gun violence, all this kind of stuff, is just one example in every area of politics that we lack the ability to have these kind of conversations. And I think it goes back to, psychologically speaking, to what I was talking about earlier, kind of the conservation of energy, the defensiveness around identity. You always hear people say, well, if we let the camel's nose into the tent, they're just going to go this much further and take away everything on either sides of an issue. So there's a lot of fear in these kind of conversations. And I think if we can get to the point where people feel more secure in their own stances, less defended in their own identities, not to say they shouldn't have identities in their own stances, but secure enough that they're able to hold them and also hold a multiplicity of different views that kind of either contradict their own or offer different pieces of the larger puzzle. As citizens, I think that would go a long way in order to inform a really important debate and dialogue that needs to take place on every issue we're dealing with, from climate to guns to drugs to whatever else we got going on in the country these days, economics, jobs.
Well, I think that the first part of that is the trust. So if you can't trust someone's statement, they say, let's say, the camel's nose aspect, yeah, I only want to do this. I only want the program to go this far. But in fact, the real truth is I want it to go much further. And this is just my way of getting you to agree to take that next step. And I think that's people do employ tactics like that. And certainly on the internet, we see constantly, the fake news phenomenon is real, and it's on both sides, and people are throwing all sorts of just noise at each other. And part of that is to, if you can confuse, if you think about the landing at Normandy, confusing the Nazis about where the Allies were going to land was a very effective tactic at being able to win that battle. But again, politics is supposed to help us not have those kind of horrific political outcomes. I mean, war is a bad political outcome in my view. And but we still try to humanize it further. We should say, what is what is society? How can society be more civil? And I would argue that by reducing the viciousness of politics and trying to put that much more effort into, showing our own veracity, our own truthfulness, and our, being really straightforward with people and saying, look, this probably help me politically, but this is really what I believe, and here's why I would take it this far but no further. And if you can understand that I really won't, I really am credible about that's my belief, then maybe we can actually meet halfway. But if if I am just telling you that so I can rob your pantry and send your kids off to my labor camp, there's a good reason for you to pull out your shotgun and say, sorry, Kevin, you can't come in.
So there are two examples that I think are really good to show how we can do it differently.
Okay, great.
I'm thinking of, so we, as you know, we used to do those retreats, Transpartisan retreats. We bring 25 to 30 leaders from various.
So you're still doing that?
Last one we did one was about 4 years ago.
Okay.
But just for your audience to know, just as a reminder, we bring 25 to 30 leaders together off-site, so like not in DC, way far away. As professionally facilitated, we usually have Mark Gerzon from the Mediators Foundation or Bill Urey from Harvard. And what's fascinating about these guys, one of the exercises they have people do is they talk about not what you believe, but why you believe what you believe. And and you do this in kind of didactic exercises or small groups, and you get to understand why people believe what they believe. It's not, I'm not a free market guy because I hate the poor, and I love corporations, and I don't want to help the poor because I hate corporations and the free market. It's like you get to understand that there's deeper values that are expressed in certain policies and politics. And it's a really nice way of just kind of disarming people, reducing their defensiveness and getting to know one another. So you can then, it's easier to find common ground that way, but it's a really nice way of developing relationships. And kind of in that mix, you can, both recognize the limitations of your own thinking. And you and I've talked about this before. It's like when you have two people who their defenses are dropped and they're having a values-based conversation, some new ideas can emerge, something that either one of them would have thought of. Because when you're defended, all you can see is the world through your own little, reality tunnel.
Right.
When you're not defended, you can kind of open it up and you can get new ideas. And that's one of the interesting things about some of the things that we've also talked about in the past is like, how do you create in the body politic or just in people's lives space for new ideas to emerge?
Right.
Transpartisan processes are one. Let me personalize this. Our culture is full of noise. You get in a cab, there's a TV on the back seat. You're in an elevator, there's the music going on. There's always noise everywhere.
Well, there's actually a commercial on TV where Mark Wahlberg is saying, we want our TVs everywhere. Actually, no, we really don't. Let's have a TV break. Yeah.
Too much noise makes it really challenging for individuals to think, period.
Yeah.
Let alone to think creatively and with novelty. That's one of when I coach folks, I talk about meditation and contemplation and time in nature. Sensory deprivation tanks are a great space because you don't have all that sensory data from the outside world. We actually, for the benefit of our citizen culture, we actually need to create more space for individuals to have free time to think, to contemplate, to be with their own feelings and thoughts, and et cetera, et cetera. We also need to create space in the body politic where people come together and engage with one another from that kind of open space as well. And that's where the Transpartisan retreats is a great opportunity and model for those kind of things.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that goes back to both from the policy angle and from the personal angle, we have to look at ways of creating more slack, more just room and time to do things correctly. And again, it's sort of at odds with being a hyper consumer and trying to drive GDP to the max. I think that to have justice, we might have to give up some wealth in the same sense that, to have justice, you might have to pay more for defense attorneys, or you might have to basically have some kind of remediation for people who have been incarcerated. And this is money out of the public till. And so I know that libertarians don't want to spend more money and conservatives don't want to spend more money. And I understand that, and I agree that we need to have fiscal discipline. But it may be to have some things work better in the future, we may have to pay the cost now. Unfortunately, the policy of the federal government has been to constantly push more debt, and more debt means, you know, your dollars are worth less, and that means you got to work harder to provide the same necessities for your family. And so I see that as being something that's really putting people on edge, and is just continuously reducing our time and energy for solving these kind of problems, and having a little bit more compassion for our neighbors.
Well, there's a movement. I like to kind of track these interesting movements that are occurring in our country. And when I give talks, I talk about these things. And one of them kind of speaks to what you just talked about, is the minimalist simplicity movement, which is transpartisan nature, multi-religious, secular. I mean, there's people from all walks of life who are recognizing, and they're not anti-market, they're just recognizing that consumerism as kind of like the goal in life, driving one's both values and time and resources, is not the best value system. That there are other things that are more important, and these folks are recognizing what's more important: fun, family, friends, time in nature, whatever it happens to be for them. It's all individual or family or community focused. But they're kind of stepping out of this consumer culture that we live in. They're saying, we don't need to compete with the Joneses, or whatever the phrase of the day might be. And it's a really interesting phenomenon, because these people, a lot of them are working less and playing more. They're buying less and enjoying life a lot more. And I'm wondering, if this becomes, instead of like a clique of people, becomes a more broad-based movement, what's that mean to what you just said earlier in terms of GDP and how we measure how we measure wealth in our country? Maybe we need to be guided by different value systems, not just GDP. Maybe there's other things that we need to include as well when we have these conversations about health of the community, health of the citizen, health of the family.
Well, that's been a common critique of GDP, that it doesn't really measure happiness directly or well-being directly. Not that it has no value. Obviously, having material goods and amount of food that we have is really staggering compared to, 100 years ago. And it is something to be proud of as an American, to see that, our country has, been the leader in building these systems and able to basically feed the whole world, and to have 8 billion people on the planet. Not that we did it all ourselves, but we really fostered the systems here, and sort of coming out of classical liberalism. But at the same time, though, I think in terms of this GDP happiness issue, and also the idea of, I think it goes into ecology, the work we don't have to do is good. It's not, the idea that we're going to create jobs by making work, by buying more stuff that we don't need. It's not a healthy equilibrium. It's basically, we're running ourselves to ruin by doing that, because if we don't have time to keep our systems working, and to make sure our schools are educating children, and making sure infrastructure is being repaired on a regular schedule, and that we're investing in the right infrastructure, we're not building bridges to nowhere, and that we're not engaging in wars we don't really engage in. Insofar as we're making more money, but we're not attending to the public square, I think that we're not doing well. And that's where maybe on the individual level we have to say, I'm gonna sort of live as a hippie. I'm not gonna buy the big mansion. I'm going to just, I'm gonna be more of a public citizen. And again, it's not to denigrate wealth making or capitalism at all. It's just saying that, it's not everything.
Completely agree. And, obviously it should be an individual choice. There should be no coercion from the state telling you should live more simply. As a cultural phenomenon, I think it's fantastic.
You have required study time before voting. You have to go to the study center.
Yeah, but just in terms of where we are in terms of our country, you look at the drug use, and I don't mean recreational drugs like heroin and cocaine and marijuana, but like prescription drugs, to deal with people working and living too hard, anxiety, depression. I mean, the uses are skyrocketing, and I have to imagine there's a correlation between the pressure from our society to work 80, 90 hours a week, a couple of jobs, to keep up with the Joneses, that kind of stuff, to be so successful, as narrowly defined successful, and these mental challenges that we're now facing that are being fixed by the pharmaceutical companies. And I want to say fixed in quotes, because the drugs can perhaps help reduce the anxiety and improve your depression, but doesn't necessarily deal with root causes. And it's interesting to look at some of the root causes, and perhaps we're on the wrong, we're heading in the wrong direction for a lot of folks that lead them to think like we should do more of what we're doing. In order to do more of what we're doing, we need the drugs to get us through it, whether it's the coffee in the morning and the caffeine in the morning, or whatever we do to bring us down at night, and then the drugs to get us through the day. And not to denigrate any one person who benefits from these medications, because they're fine if you need them, narrowly speaking. But as a culture, maybe we should rethink how we are living our lives that necessitate the broad use of these drugs, as an example, and recreational drugs too.
Well, that's exactly right. I think that, that's another symptom. I would say that's a debit against the credit of the GDP, where you say, well, we're doing so well, but, we have this many people incarcerated, this many people, who are drugging themselves with 6 different kinds of things every night. No, I'm Mr. Alcoholic, Mr. Caffeineaholic. I've been there and I've done all that, and it's not very healthy, and it's I'm still not a perfectly healthy person, but this is where
work on that.
Yeah, we're working on it, and we're trying to realize that it is true. The root causes. I mean, Plato in his Socratic dialogues, they talk a lot about what is it that makes life so wonderful, the true, the good, and the beautiful. And these, I think, are human constants. And insofar as we are ignoring the true, the good, and the beautiful, and we are not talking about them and helping each other get to them in our personal lives from our own perspectives, and finding our own happiness based on those principles, we're going to always be drugging ourselves in one form or another in order to try to survive a nightmarish world that we've sort of put upon ourselves. And I think I do say put upon ourselves, because I think that we should embrace self-governance, that we're not just victims of some system that's external, that we are the people and we're the government, and it's time for us to make it better.
Yeah, I completely agree with having empowered individuals who make better decisions for themselves and their families and their communities and stuff. Part of that's education, part of it's self-responsibility and self-governance, et cetera, et cetera. One thing I've been joking around about doing the past couple of weeks is creating a website called wehatechildren.com.
Wehatechildren.com?
Yeah, and just putting up what we do. Not even funny. It's like, here's how we do our education, here's how we do our food, here's how we do our medicine. If we actually cared for our children, we would do almost opposite of what we're doing based on the latest best science we have. I mean, things could change a couple decades from now. We learn newer and better things based on the scientific data. But it seems to me that what we feed them is crap.
Yeah.
We just put them up for diabetes and heart disease and cancer and multiple different metabolic disorders, which is great for the pharmaceutical companies and the doctors, but kind of sucks for the next generation of their kids and their kids and their kids, because of epigenetics. We're just going to pass this down and make it more likely that we're just going to get sicker and sicker as a species. And then you can go down not just food, but what we do, drug them, and what we do in terms of the education system, and blah 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 blah.
No, I think there's a real nexus for Greens, environmentalists, sort of whole grains kind of folks, to come together with people from the libertarian side to talk about how can we open from a policy perspective, how can we open spaces for at least some good examples to emerge. Not to say that we're all going to, we're not going to force it on everybody, but in order to at least not have some kind of one singular rule set determining one singular bad lifestyle for the whole country. And I think that's where certainly subsidies to certain kinds of production, and also restrictions on small business, food trucks, school choice. It doesn't mean that we can't have public support for education. It doesn't mean we can't have some oversight from the federal government level of pathogens and entering the food system. It just means that we don't have to have a bunch of dumb rules that prevent. I was talking to an old friend of mine, libertarian movement, about starting a hot dog truck business, and he was talking about how he wanted to cook the hot dogs a different way, and he had to use a study and get special permission from the state board to cook his hot dogs the way he thought they should be cooked. And I think that's kind of funny that you have to have a PhD to run a hot dog cart, but I think that's the kind of thing that on a very micro level, it's preventing innovation, and people know about those kind of examples, and so they don't even try. Moreover, people don't have the capital and the time to build new spaces and new schools. And if they have a house, they're not allowed to use it for a small business to have a small school maybe. And so we got to find ways of letting people do things a little differently, while still trying to look out for the real harm. People, obviously we care about children getting medicine and not being abused, and so I just think that there's a need for a new political movement that captures these kind of free liberal ideas, and I don't see it coming out of either of the major parties, certainly.
No, neither do I. And I would suggest a couple good resources for your video watchers or listeners, however they might be gathering this. AERO, AERO, Alternative Education Resource Organization. I think it's educationrevolution.com. is a great resource for anyone interested in alternative to conventional education, homeschooling, unschooling, deschooling, democratic free schooling. There's tons of really interesting things going on in the education space, experiments, some thousands of years old, that just seem experimental to us. There's also PaleoFX, run by a friend of mine, Keith Norris. They're doing a lot of really interesting thinking around diet.
PaleoFX,
PaleoFX. Like the paleo diet, Paleolithic diet.
Sure.
But it's much more than just the diet. They're looking at lifestyle, broadly speaking. And if anyone's interested in the critique of kind of conventional medicine / agriculture, food policy that comes out of the USDA, FDA, HHS, these guys offer a great critique of those systems and then offer alternatives to those systems. So there's hope. There's a lot of, and the simplicity minimalism movement, whether it's the minimalist.
What's your favorite minimalism website?
There are three guys that, well, actually one of them is two guys, but the Minimalists. They actually have a movie that just came out, available on Netflix. I listen to their podcasts, read their blogs, and watch their movie.
Okay.
Joshua Becker.
Joshua Becker.
I think it's the less of now, less now. He's a blogger as well. He has a book that just came out. Hopefully I didn't F up his book. He's great too. And then Leo Babauta, Zen. If you do Leo's comma Zen,
Can you spell his name real fast?
Oh God. No, let me email it to you.
I swear we went over these three the last time we talked, but I didn't actually put the notes up on the web blog, but I'll do it this time.
Yeah. So those, I mean, and there's a multitude of other great people out there, but those are the kind of three that I pay a lot of attention to on a regular basis. But like I said, there's so many really interesting movements going on in health, in wellness, in medicine. I mean, Peter Diamandis, one of the co-founders of the X Prize.
Okay.
The things that he and his people are doing in terms of innovations in medicine are amazing. Look at Singularity University. They hold a conference every year. I think West Coast.
I'm familiar with Singularity University.
Nanotech and biotech and all these kind of really quantified self, and so there's great things going on. There's interesting cultural phenomenon. It's just not cohesive. It's not like there's a movement of these people. It's just movements of these people. And one of the things I see us as responsible for doing is bringing these people together, start having conversations.
I would love to be a part of facilitating that. And, I've been a little bit out of the picture since I've been doing all this software stuff the last several years. But I feel that there is a real need to, again, work on that public policy space and to get that idea across to people that there's a huge number of people out there doing awesome stuff from all sides that aren't even necessarily political, and that would be would work together in creating a vision of America. And again, the idea of creating a vision of America, in my view, is not about like having sort of this this one set of exact values, waving a flag and eating pie and having picnics in the city park or whatever. I mean, and those are all nice things, but the idea that we should be a space, we should be a polity in which people feel it as, I think it's part of their character to say, if something is not as cool as we think it should be, we're going to make it cooler. We're going to make things work better for people. We're going to make it healthier, and we're going to feel empowered and have the time and money and space to and the legal authority to go and build that better world.
Right on, right on. Well, hey, Kev, this has been great. I hope we haven't done this in a while. Hopefully we can come back and do this more regularly. I've enjoyed
Let's definitely plan on doing it. And again, thank you so much for your time. And this is, if everyone's watching this on YouTube right now, it'll be at thefreeliberal.com here in about 30 minutes. And
awesome.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Kevin. Talk to you soon, man.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Later.